Hello, everyone. Welcome to this third and final Radcast of the day on the Social Club at the End of the World. And here, the focus is on a new story for humanity. In fact, this will be the first video in a series that we'll do, a weekly series on a new story for humanity. And just to put it in the context of the others that we recorded earlier today, the first hangout we did 2 hours ago was on refreezing the Arctic, and we talked about the different possible solutions for refreezing the Arctic. Then in the next one, we talked about radical collective intelligence. Now, why did we do it that way? Well, in order to refreeze the Arctic, we need to come up with myriad solutions, engineering solutions, financial solutions, political solutions, cultural solutions, media, marketing, PR, meme solutions, et cetera, et cetera. To come up with all of these solutions in turn, we need a platform that is sufficiently powerful and sophisticated to facilitate humans and artificial intelligence coming together, Lord of the Rings style, to co-create all the solutions that we need. I want to welcome our guests who are live on the Hangout today. We've got Adam joining us from Olympia, Washington. We've got Michael Gallo, who I'll just call Gallo, who's joining us from Northern California. We've got Michael Gosney, who I'll simply refer to as Goz, who's joining us from San Francisco. And we may get another Michael or two. We seem to have a proliferation of Michaels on some of these Hangouts, which is a great thing. In fact, right on cue is Michael in the south of France. How you doing there, Michael? And welcome, gentlemen. I'm going to go on mute so that you all can say hello to the world. Going on mute.
Good to be here.
Hey, everyone.
Hi, all. Hi, Jamin. Thanks for inviting us into the call. And hello, everyone who's watching in coming weeks and months.
Hello, everyone. Appreciate being here. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, I sure appreciate all of you being here, and I appreciate everyone watching. So, as I was talking, just to kind of recap super quick, to refreeze the Arctic, we need solutions. To generate those solutions, we need a massively higher form of intelligence, radical collective intelligence. In order to get humanity to A, wake up, and B, get on board and be part of this radical collective intelligence, we need a new story for humanity that inspires people onto this new path. And we need a new story for humanity for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is inspiring people to check out radical collective intelligence and join the effort. Either help us build the platform, join the myriad conversations that are ongoing for generating solutions to the ongoing crises facing Mother Earth and all species. So that's the topic for this hour, is a new story for humanity. And so I'm going to just take a stab at it just to get the ball rolling and give one possible abbreviated version of a new story for humanity that might be inspiring for these very purposes. So the story goes like this. At first, we were humans in our kind of natural state on planet Earth, regardless of how we got here. And we were kind of doing the hunter-gatherer thing, and we were beating drums and running around half naked and making love and looking at the stars. And basically, life was pretty cool. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn cool. And it was a heck of a lot better than it is today. And then what happened? Well, then a bunch of humanity started to get its hands on, with our notable opposable thumbs. We started to get our hands on some things, I'll just call them, that really started to change the course of life on Earth. We're a tool-using species. We have this fascination with tools, so we started monkeying around with tools. And then we used these tools to harness forms of energy that were latent and stored on or near the surface of Mother Earth, like oil and gas and coal. And so we started having new forms of power that started having tremendous implications. Then we invented this thing called money, and we quickly became addicted to hoarding, and hoarding became part of the culture. And whereas back in good old hunter-gatherer days, the attractiveness of a male mate to a female was given by such things as hunting ability and ability to influence others and, you know, be part of a constructive process. Now, with the advent of money, attractiveness became largely a function of how much money you have. And so we became addicted to hoarding. Hoarding became an addiction. Accumulation became an addiction. And finally, modern agriculture. There's a whole set of tools and practices that constitute modern agriculture, and that enabled us to produce massive amounts of food and store massive amounts of food, which all of the above enabled a massive population boom to the point that, you know, there's 7.4 billion of us and growing. And so all of these things that I just mentioned, tools, power sources, money, modern agriculture, and all those gave way to this modality of life of hoarding and accumulation. And that all those things combined have put us on this path where we're now destroying little by little all of life on Earth, and including ourselves. So that's kind of like the first part of the story, is this kind of this downward descent into destruction and overpopulation and overshoot. And then in this story that we're just drafting here, and I invite everyone to jump in, then what happened? Well, a bunch of us started to become aware of what was going on. The people on this call and, you know, a few million others started to become aware that, wow, we've really overshot, and, you know, and things are getting worse and worse by the day. And so, you know, we're going to need to do something about this. And so those of us who started realizing that there was a problem also started having notions of solutions. And then little by little, we started coming together to talk about these solutions. And we realized that we're going to need to come up with a lot of powerful solutions very quickly if we're going to save our lives and, in fact, complex life on planet Earth. And so we started to consider and explore, is there some sort of platform that we can create that'll facilitate us coming together and co-creating all these solutions that we need? And that was the genesis of Radical Collective Intelligence. And it started with a few visionary pioneers. And then at first, little by little, and then more and more people started joining, and we started coming together and co-creating all these cool solutions, including co-creating the platform itself of Radical Collective Intelligence. So from a small number of us, we grew to millions. I'm telling the story. Now I'm getting ahead of myself into the future. We grew to millions and tens of millions, and it became this huge global movement to transform life on Earth and save life on Earth, starting with such massive projects as refreezing the Arctic. So this is, anyway, that's okay. Kind of a pretty loquacious version. I'm going to go on mute so Gaz and others can chime in on the news story.
Yeah, I'm inspired to jump in. Thank you, Jamin. And I think that that's, you know, a summary of the story and the potential, you know, vision of what we're working on here, galvanizing a new movement. I mean, certainly the awakening of our species to our situation on the planet has been going on for a long time. And in the early, you know, I mean, Emerson and John Muir and Rachel Carson, right? And, you know, and so, but it's true that now in the hyper complex, super accelerated culture of the early 21st century, this wake up is taking a new form and requires new forms of engagement. And that's what, of course, we're doing right here, and we're envisioning and taking steps with the Radish platform. But I don't want to go on too long, but I would like to speak for a couple of minutes on the kind of the perhaps even a little broader context with, you know, the human condition and the human dilemma that's been going on since the Greeks. You know, what is our purpose here exactly? You know, I mean, that's been a recurrent question through the ages knowing that we're distinct. We see that we're distinct from the rest of the natural world around us. And of course, that got us into trouble, and it's still trouble that we think that we're completely distinct and not, in fact, interwoven with it all. But certainly the answer to that question has been, well, simply to be, to live, to thrive is our purpose. And in a cosmic sense, I believe that that is the main answer, that's what life is about. And every instance of life is a unique, novel expression of life, and it's contributing to the cosmic database, the Akashic record of living forms, and that in itself is creation. That's what we are, and that's the baseline, you know. But here we are on this planet. We've created this neo-nature, which is Paolo Soleri's term for this new reality that we've created with concrete and electrons bouncing off satellites, you know, and everything in between. And this neo-nature has been, in my observation, our application in a primitive way, a naive way of biomimicry, learning from nature and mimicking its systems, but in a very crude manner. And as we've moved forward, our technologies and design ideas have become increasingly sophisticated biomimetic inventions, you know, and we're finally to the point where we understand how we can relate to the biosphere, our neo-nature and the original natural world integrate in healthy ways. We see how to do it, but at the same time, the context is, uh-oh, we've built this primitive civilization and it's destroying the whole fucking thing, and it looks like it's almost too late to employ these whole systems design strategies that we now understand how to do, you know. So it is this super critical moment. I do feel that what comes out of it all is, what is our purpose here on the planet? Well, in fact, we are meant to be the stewards of this living world. That's why we're equipped the way we are. And it's to take care of this world, and it's to represent this world to the galactic ecology in whatever form that might take. But we obviously, not to say we're the only representatives of the world. In fact, many would say that interdimensional communication goes on with dolphins and whales and has been for a long time. And in other ways, our living world is in communication with the higher planes, but we're obviously not consciously taking our position as the representatives of this planet because we don't have our act together down here. But once we get our act together in certain ways, and I believe just having a coherent vision is the first step. I think that we're going to be in a position to properly represent our living world. So that's enough of my kind of overview, but I was struck by what you said starting off, Jamin, about what's our big story. You know, what's the narrative, you know, the true narrative of the human race. So
well guys, I'm inspired to share a passage of the Bible.
Right on.
Where there is no vision, the people perish. That's from Amos. And in a sense, the story is the vision. So when we talk about, you know, the new narrative or story or whatever, right, that's needed, it's a very old story. It's a very fairy tale-like story, but it's become all the more real for us as a human species, because instead of facing phantoms, you know, really we have to face ourselves, right? Which we're always our phantoms, face our own inhibitions, etc. And I think the whole notion of a collective form of intelligence is sort of that new modality, because as we've become more individualistic, we've also increased the need for a form of salvation. Ironically, at the very point in which less and less people believe in God, including myself, there is this need that's become all the more real for a form of salvation. Let's face it. So to me, it's just an age-old salvation story, but it's become so much more complicated by reality.
Beautiful, beautiful. Gaio, you wanted to chime in, please?
I would love to. Thank you. Yeah, I have a couple perspectives to share, but I think maybe the most important one is kind of going back to the beginning. You know, Jamie, you had kind of put forth a narrative at the beginning of this talk, and is largely accurate in my perspective. But also, I just want to like kind of revisit the meta to this conversation of, you know, first, I think we're all clear on that basically speaking, that humanity does not have a clear vision, not only of our future, but also of the past. And I want to really emphasize that key point is that while we certainly need that clear vision to kind of have a North Star of who we can become and what our purpose might be, and as we go forward in such a world of rapid change and complexity, I think equally important, if not more important, is actually looking backwards at our together and understanding where we've come from, the choices that were made, and why, in a narrative, in a framework narrative that really helps us hold that in a coherent and healthy way that allows us to go forward with a clear vision. Meaning, you know, there's actually, in a micro scale, there's actually something called narrative therapy. This is actually a type of therapy where we look at people's stories. All of us, all we do is we all have stories about our lives and certain things that happen to us, or certain ways we look at what happened to us that may or may not actually be accurate. And whether or not we actually get accurate, the narrative we hold at our present time can actually help us be okay with whatever happened and move forward with a lot more energy and purpose. And so, like, you know, I can give a couple examples of that. And I think there might be more than one narrative also. That's the other thing. And as far as like having one singular narrative for humanity, that's not something I'm fully sold into. I think it's more about a weaving of many different narratives, kind of like a rope, so to speak. We have kind of like a rope of different strands. But for example, you know, Jamin, you had announced in your narrative that there was some turning point with the human's invention and relationship with money and an addiction to money. And see, I would even suggest that we could look at that one part of the narrative in a way that would help us kind of like loosen up the trauma to that choice. Meaning that maybe actually wasn't such a bad choice. It was just a very natural evolution that happened with our relationship with collaboration with each other that allowed for a very gradual invention of this thing. Today we call it money. Back then it was called something else, and now we're reinventing it again. But to be able to like go into the nuances of that, so to speak, and look at you know, kind of like sticky points like that in our history we're not clear on that either. We're not really clear what happened there. Where did we make a wrong turn somewhere? Did we go somewhere wrong? And kind of like loosening up those kinks. And you know, for example, there's a great video I could recommend to, you know, all on YouTube, a TEDx talk called "The 4 Pillars of a Decentralized Society," where he goes back and he looks at these 3 stages we've been into. We used to live in a very decentralized society where we had no need for money or control or power. And then as populations grew, because of Dunbar's number, because we started to come into social relationships with so many different people at one time, we had to have centralized control emerge of not just money, but people who were strong and had power. They then created money for them, but we had to have these centralizing controls in order for our population to grow. But our population needs to grow anyways. We're on a thriving, you know, organism of a planet where the human population is growing in collective intelligence. Meaning the more people we have on the planet, then we're going to get to some kind of new global brain or some kind of new, you know, collective state where we're able to realize a greater purpose, not just for humanity, but maybe a greater purpose that's beyond humanity. But in our story, it was necessary for us to grow in population. And because we grew in population, we then had to invent this thing called money. That's just a facilitation of people collaborating on larger scales. And that became a problem that had benefits and it had problems. But nonetheless, that was just a necessary step we had to take in order to get to here. And now we redesign economics and we redesign technology to help us to take the next step. But, you know, without getting into too much detail of that, I think it's important to be able to create a holistic narrative that's a, again, multi-strand narrative that works for a lot of different people and a lot of different value sets, that we can kind of like all weave it together so we all just really feel good that we are humanity and that we've had a really rough trek so far, especially the last 1,000, 2,000 years has been this really sticky kind of like adolescent phase of kind of coming into our coming to learn what our power is and how to yield it, but also being kind of like compassionate towards that and in a much larger scope of evolution in general, not just human evolution, but evolution in general, and that we're maybe fulfilling some others. So that's what I have to say so far.
Beautiful, Gaio. Thank you so much. Adam?
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. I like what Gauss said about the purpose of humanity on the earth, and I wanted to expound on that a little bit. And I also liked what Gaio had to say about money. And so I think the purpose of man's life on the earth is to watch over all of life. I mean, we are by default the smartest creature on the earth. We were able to organize. It's our responsibility to watch over all of life. And we have not been doing that. In fact, we've been insanely destroying life to the point where we're on the brink of destroying our own lives. Now, why would we do that? And Michael Gaio pointed out that, we've been acting insanely like this. Well, I think Gauss pointed out since the Greeks, and Gaio said a couple thousand years. Well, and you mentioned money, and I just want to briefly touch on that. And I have my own belief on that, and you might want to think about it. We don't have to talk about it if you don't want. I posted a link on here to a video that I made on YouTube that describes the way I think. But I think that money is a poison to mankind. I think that it reacts in our brains and causes us to act insanely. You guys use the term addiction. Well, it's an addictive poison, and it causes mankind to think about these, to forget about his responsibility over life. It causes us to get up in the morning, and instead of thinking about normal reality of life, like where the moon is and the things that hunters and gatherers would think of when they got up in the morning, how to leave certain plants, don't pick them all, so they can restore, they can replenish. Don't kill all the herd, don't let the big ones go, or something like that. They would be thinking about those things. But instead, today we get up and we think about artificial things that are created by money. We think about, we flip on the light, we get in our car, we do all these things that are artificial, that are created by money. And if you think about it, all throughout this, ever since we started using money, it has caused us to act insanely, just like a drug addict. And I'd say that money is to mankind like heroin is to the heroin addict. That's all I have to say.
Well, and that hang up with money was radically transformed at the beginning of the 20th century with the essential creation of consumer culture, the whole paradigm of consumer culture, that we attach so much value to these manufactured items that we could buy. And again, we've cited this many times, but it is a wonderful documentary, The Century of the Self, that tracks the origin of the advertising industry, speaking directly to our subconscious, all built around early propaganda techniques combined with Freudian psychology. That was at the root of the original public relations industry that led to the broadcast advertising built into the early programming that we all watched in the mass media. And at the same time, built up around us is this gigantic apparatus of retail, sales, and fashion. And that just was never, you know, people before that, they didn't chase after things like that. They just, you know, money was about feeding your family and providing shelter and having a decent life, you know. It wasn't about acquiring all this shit and getting status because you have cool stuff. And of course, it's been irresistible for us because we've built, I was just speaking to a friend of mine the other day, this is our vision of heaven on earth as best we could envision it. And I wrote an essay about the buildup to the year 2000 and how we were pursuing this vision of Tomorrowland that was formulated in the 50s. That's where it was crystallized of what the ideal life was going to be, with this perfect kitchen with all these advanced appliances and this modern American home. And that was sold to the world, that concept. And we were building up to the year 2000 was this marker of the future. And we were building this modern heaven on earth civilization just in time for the future. And it's fascinating if you think about it, because these milestones, like a stake in the ground on the timeline, and we build towards it. That's a very important thing to realize, the power of our mass intention. And this escapes people because we were in it like swimming in an ocean, but we were all captivated by the year 2000 as this incredible icon of the future. It was waiting for us ahead there. And if you remember, 3 years out, 1997, it was still, the future is going to be here in 3 years. It was just, the whole world was thinking that way. And, you know, we got there, and what happened? Nothing, because we have no intention for what it really is. And the world just kind of fell apart. There was no focus anymore. And then we had 9/11, and we've descended into even deeper chaos since then, because we have no social intention of where we want to go. That's the best thing that we had as a massive intention, was we're going to be the future by 2000. And here's what we got, you know? So the story of humanity is, in that regard, more important than just a story. It is what we align to. And that's why the governments are so aware of this principle of, you keep the narrative going of what's going on in the country, so people just buy into that narrative. And this is what we're all struggling to do, is what's the next hole on up from this circular, paradoxical bunch of bullshit that we have going on, you know? That's what we're working on.
It's a great point, guys. I want to offer maybe another hold on. Again, I really look at the perspective as the hold on forward, the vision forward, which you're right. We in 2000, it's a really great insight. I remember that time, and I remember that right after 2000, things got just really unbound for a moment. Like, it just, like, all this innovation was happening. And then it only took a year before 9/11 happened. That was
changes have certainly moved.
9/11 was the
in our coffee houses and our.
Oh, could you please
stages.
mute your mic?
Oh, he muted. He muted. Go okay. Back to you guys.
Then we had that collapse. Basically, 9/11 represented the collapse, and that was because we had a lack of clear vision. You know, I think, just as another example of how also looking into the past to possibly provide a really clear path forward. There's also a lot of evidence out there, from people like Graham Hancock and others, of that there's still hidden things in our past about that we possibly had really advanced civilizations that existed at an earlier time and that somehow disappeared. There's a lot of evidence that there is some great cataclysm. This evidence is not just woven in to our myths and religions about the Great Flood and fire falling from the sky, which is universal across many cultures, but it also even shows that we're getting continued evidence scientifically that actually about 13 to 30,000 years ago, there was some kind of really great cataclysm that basically almost wiped out humanity. We have that story in our genetic DNA. All collectively, on a subconscious level, we all remember that, but we haven't really resolved it yet. I have a theory that a lot of this story we have about money and that the way our culture has become is that in some sense, subconsciously, we've been recreating the conditions to come up to another ecological crisis because we really haven't come to terms with the last cataclysm we went through thousands of years ago. So I think by also by a kind of scope into place of really getting a super integrated story into place that goes back all the way back, even if it's not entirely accurate, just something that really makes sense for everyone and that works, so that we're clear and coherent on it. And I think there's something really powerful about that for the subconscious, not just individual mind but collective mind, that then allows us to really create a crystal clear vision forward that stays, so we don't have to keep trying to go back and try to solve something from our past.
The way I get around this, get my arms around it, is like I said, I look at money as a literal poison to mankind, and what happened when we all of a sudden went into this massive consumerism, when the Industrial Revolution happened. Well, what happened during the Industrial Revolution? I think we were again attacked by another poison. And that other poison was oil. We started taking oil out of the ground, and it was like pouring gasoline on a fire. When oil gave power to mankind, and when that power was mixed with money, all of a sudden money could be reproduced. And as a poison, the two meshed, and it created the Industrial Revolution, which caused population explosion, and all these insane things like nuclear power, and all this stuff is a result of these two poisons that are influencing mankind and causing us to act insane. That's what I think.
I would add a third poison, which is modern agriculture and the growing and storing of grain at scale. Also was a huge factor. But anyway, it all combined together in this toxic soup that has brought us to where we are today, and that's the story that we're fleshing out. Back to you, Gaio.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing about that, and I'm tempted to want to dive into those details. I think that gets away from there's something like I could go into debating those points specifically, or I could just talk again about the fact that if we're including poison in our story, then what does that do for us today? I'm not sure. Because again, I could look at that and say, well, it wasn't poison, it was medicine. It maybe didn't taste good. That definitely had some side effects, but it was a necessary nutrient for us at that time in order to grow into what we, not all of what we are today we want, but if we hadn't done the tool thing, then we'd still be living in caves collecting berries and stuff like that. And then would we be realizing the telos purpose of the collective organism that wants to be something far greater than just hunters and gatherers? How would we have gotten to that place without taking the cultural steps of evolution? And again, if we're framing it as a poison that shouldn't have happened, then again, that muddles up our story. So how can we look at these things in a way that makes it healthy for us, that yes, those were hard decisions and no, they weren't perfect? And how can we look at it in a way of specificity, understanding why exactly money came in and why agriculture came in and what the benefits were at that time that made perfect sense for us? Then now looking back, it seems like a mistake. How do we have a story where it begins to soften those hard turns?
Well, I think there's villains among us, so to speak, that we can't deny the fact that certain individuals, certain institutions throughout history have perverted things, perverted money. Interest, where does interest go?
Right. Well, I agree. I mean, I make a strong distinction between money and power. Money is just a neutral technology.
Right.
It's designed. The money system we have today was designed in a specific way to have power by some people. But that doesn't mean that money's the thing. It means that the psychological achievement for power is the problem. They can design that need for power in all kinds of ways, and they do.
That's right.
But also, my perspective on that, again, I recommend watching this video on TEDx, but of the 4 pillars of a decentralized society. where he lays out again that humanity existed for millions of years in relatively peaceful small tribes,
right,
with little chiefs, and they got in wars now and then. They probably traded stones for things. It's been around, but the thing is that as we start growing in population, because of the size of the population,
yeah,
central power holders moved in to say, I will protect you, I will build the castles, I will build the banks, because we grew to this size of population. I mean,
and by the way, that's something to really,
this is not even really a speculation. Like, that happened. We grew in size. And because we grew in size,
more than that, it's important to really realize that the massive exponential increase in the population. And that's why, I mean, history only has so many lessons to teach us when it comes to managing our modern reality. Because if you look at those civilizations in the past whose stories that we live by in many ways, they were miniature little civilizations, the size of states in the you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The world was small. It's a vast, endless, scary, Nostradamus's vision that he conveyed back then of this apocalyptic future. Well, that's just everyday life in this reality to people back then. If they came here, it's a gigantic apocalypse going on right now, 24/7, this civilization. You know what I mean? It's when you really visualize it. And again, the lesson there is the past is relevant in many ways to the modern civilization, but on the other hand, it's a whole nother ball game. There's nothing like this has ever been on the face of this planet. I mean, even previous advanced civilizations, I don't believe it wasn't like this. We would know, right? This neo-nature again that we have enveloped the planet with. So,
well, I think that the humanity, we used to live as hunters and gatherers, and then they decided, some of them decided at times, and I've even heard this recently, but they decided to start harvesting or planting crops and herding animals. And essentially, that's when they started eating off the tree of knowledge, so to speak. And when they did that, they created an environment where they were more easily able to produce food. So naturally, their populations started to go up. And so after their populations start to grow up, then all of a sudden they look down upon themselves and they say, well, now we have to keep working. Now we've enslaved ourselves, because in order to support this population, we have to keep planting and we have to keep herding. And I think at some point, well, anyway, the money came in, and I don't want to get in. I don't want to.
Well, look, I think that this is a very important theme that you brought up of money and what that means. What is value? And we're in the middle of a transition in so many ways with that very concept. One area being the cryptocurrency world and what that implies. But on the other hand, there's a whole movement of community currencies and empowering, local communities, soft currency versus hard currency, the international currencies, and rethinking money, the Norwegian nations, people having just as a citizen, you are paid a certain amount, that whole model, I think that's part of the new story, because related to that is the demise of the labor workforces by AI and automation that's going to be happening. And so what do humans do? And this is what our intentional communities have been modeling this, what do we do with our time if we're not doing labor intensive jobs to make money to pay for our food, this little treadmill we're on? Well, back to the ancient Greeks, we learn about ourselves in the cosmos. We educate ourselves. We elevate ourselves. There's a lot to do. Education is ongoing. Evolution is ongoing. It's a new phase for humanity too. This is what we've dreamt about. We're going to free ourselves with our automation. Now we're in the middle of completely fearing it all. instead of as a society making the preparations for a further evolution, you know?
Well, and in some sense, that was the step we took too. When we part of the agricultural movement was that since we were able to settle, we didn't have to be running all over the hillsides every single day to look for our next berry just so we could survive. That was all they were doing. They were surviving. They were fending off the dinosaurs or the tigers and the bears, and they were hiding in caves and running out to get berries, basically. Once we started settling in agriculture, the food started becoming taking up less time, and people began centralizing into certain skills. Like people became, blacksmiths, and people became herders, and people became artists, and so we began to kind of concentrate into culture itself, both at an individual level of people beginning to kind of specialize in themselves a little bit, get to know what they might be able to do. And so that was the beginning of it. Really, that was the beginning of culture. And so those steps then led all the way up to now. And again, I'll just want to paraphrase a little bit this other video I've been referencing, the 4 pillars of a decentralized society, meaning that we were very decentralized before that. Agriculture came along. We then, because the population grew, we had to have both very strong and possibly even sociopathic type people come in, because that's what they're good at. Sociopaths are really good at taking control of everyone. So because we had larger populations, I think that emerged at that time. Maybe sociopaths didn't exist before then. Maybe that was kind of like an evolutionary function to have sociopaths emerge at that time. And then we went through like basically the last couple thousand years of going all the way up from early banks to big central banks now, and big mean governments and big mean military systems and oil rigs and all this junk we have now. But since the beginning of since about the time, the printing press is one of the first technologies that came along in the middle of that began to actually decentralize again, saying, oh, how now we can because before that we had centralized books. People had if most people couldn't read, and so you'd go to the church or you'd go to your local clergyman, and he was the one who knew how to read, and he would have the only book in 500 miles around, and he would read you what you're supposed to know, and he would tell you what you're supposed to know. Then the printing press came along, and all of a sudden lots of people were publishing and lots of people were distributing books, and that was really the beginning of a new wave of decentralization in our cultures.
Well, and more than that, it's also related to we were at that time, Michael. The oral culture, oral transmission of knowledge was still very much alive, and this is people having whole bodies of knowledge in their mind and conveying it through the early practices of proper dialogue. They would transmit this knowledge, but we gave that off to the printed word then gradually and lost it. Just now that like the cell phones have taken many of our other mental functions out of our brain. But
also, in some sense, the printed word also retained a lot of knowledge that oral tradition didn't retain.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the point.
Just do that
again, the digital realm, it's an uber retainment of everything. We were just at the Internet Archive this weekend, right? The whole internet's backed up also, going back 30 years.
So, the printing press was, in some sense, the beginning of a new wave over, hundreds of years now of other, technologies that are beginning to revisit decentralization, but on this scale now. Now we have billions of people on the planet. In order to get billions of people on the planet, we had to go through this very narrow couple thousand years of really fucking hard ass centralization. And I think now we're coming out of it, and it's just a little hard to see that. So I think framing it, that's just one frame. We can have all kinds of different frames, but I think framing it in that way can be really helpful, knowing that we kind of had to go through this centralization period that included money and these other really, really wicked things in order to scale the global population at this point. For I believe because we need this many people on the planet in order to have kind of like the global brain.
That's an encouraging vision that there is some purpose to this massive population. And again, it does, where are we going? And, Solari's vision of the cities of the future, right, which are, of course, eco-cities, but he also transmitted some amazing ideas of where social evolution might go. Imagine a city of a couple of million people, an arcology. I think it was Theodiga or Theologia. And this was a center, would aggregate the communities of practice around spirituality on the planet would aggregate in this massive city, or one of several that's what they specialized in. But the vision was there. They're not just, it's not a city of philosophers, it's a city of spiritual practitioners. And it's, you know, you reference things that go on today where there's, in India, they'll have 100,000 people meditating to preserve the safety of the continent of India. That's part of their military budget for that, you know. I mean, the use of our mass mental power projecting reality is something that's going to become more and more built in, more realized. And imagine future civilization where we're engaged in these collective meditations. I mean, this is really where I believe the contact with other dimensions and other life forms ultimately comes in practices like this. But anyway,
on that note, Michael, here's another good book drop.
Super Health.
David Nichol on his book,
yes.
Which is exactly about that. It goes into great specificity around even some of the science that really proves this is true. That when we get people together with a coherent intention in a peaceful way, that it really has a subtle psychic effect on the whole planet.
Absolutely, it does.
That we need numbers to do that. Numbers of people, you know.
And this is part of our discovery of, while we're engaged in creating this artificial intelligence, we don't know where it's going. You know, at the same time, we have to come back to our internet and our innate, amazing powers that are beyond just collective intelligence. It's collective psychic power. That's, you know, a difficult word to use because it has so many connotations. But we know that remote viewing, I mean, my girlfriend regularly does remote healing where she'll have someone on the other side of the world feeling a tingling in their stomach when she does it. This is very real, all this stuff. And it needs to be brought out to all of us to realize how much we really have going on just with our own super nature, you know, it's inside us. And so again, what do we do when we don't do stupid jobs? You know, there's a lot of things to do. There's and new careers and new practices are going to emerge, I believe, as we create the mechanisms to steward our planet. I mean, there's countless jobs to be done, and mobilizing military forces to do major remediation projects around the world and build new cities and dams, intelligent dams, you know, that house people and generate electricity and don't screw up the river ecosystem.
Right. These are jobs that need to be done that are not being orchestrated by the invisible hand of greed is good consumer capitalism.
Exactly.
There's no Uber, there's no Facebook, there's no Google that's just corralling together millions of people to get them to do these giant remediation projects. And so we're bringing in radical collective intelligence as a new constellation of frames that enables us to look at life and reality in a new way, in a different way, that empowers us to be solution-centric and united in generating and implementing these solutions, as opposed to just doing same old,
yes,
on the old paradigm. Mm-hmm.
And what's exciting to me is that those individuals that you're talking about participating in these various systems, including the Radish Project, many of them are independent experts or just citizens with good ideas and actions to contribute, but also many of them are representatives of larger organizations and institutions. And it's those people working within those organizations that need to bring those groups to the table also and figure out different ways to get out of business as usual and cross over boundaries that are not normally considered, even thought of. You know, the kinds of massive new collaborations and partnerships that are going to be necessary to do this stuff. So bravo to the individual spirit, you know, that is really where it has to start. You cannot move these institutions that are just so entrenched in their way of doing business without people inside just creating a wake-up call.
Absolutely. You know, this is an awesome conversation. I'm going to need to break away for about the next 10 minutes or so and get ready because I have to go get my mom. But I'm going to let you gentlemen continue as long as you want. I'll check back in 10 or 15 minutes when I'm ready to go, and then we can either wrap or let it continue, let it roll. I'll be back in a few minutes, gentlemen. Please carry on.
Okay.
I don't have a whole lot more to say. I might drop off here too, unless.
Yeah, I had until 1 o'clock. So it's been I think a great start of a important thread.
Yeah.
The big picture, and we've covered a lot of great bases today. And Adam, it's nice to meet you.
Yeah, Adam.
Any final thoughts, Michael Call?
All very interesting. Adam brought up the subject of money, and there we went. that's the nature. That's the nature of it. So anyway, guys, I think we may be meeting here soon.
That's correct.
Want to take 15? Are you still on, or?
Let's take 15 and connect. Can you come on Skype?
Unfortunately, I'm not on Skype.
Or Zoom?
Do you have you use Apple, don't you? You have an iPhone?
Yeah.
Or something?
Yeah.
We could do FaceTime. That's very easy, and I could FaceTime you.
Let's do that in 15 minutes.
Okay, good hanging with you.
All right, guys.
And,
all right. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, Adam.
See you on the next one.
See you next time.
All right,
Bye,
everybody. Thank you.
Okie doke. Looks like just me again. That wrapped up pretty quick. Well, I'm getting ready to roll. Anyway, great meeting, great hangout, everyone. Thanks everyone for watching. This is the beginning of a weekly series that we're putting together, that we're just starting today, on a new story for humanity, and of course it dovetails with the other series that we did earlier today. So look forward to seeing you all on future sessions. Thank you all for joining. Thank you.